Thank you for being here. This is a fireside chat, but there's no fire. I never quite
These really comfy chairs, though, you know.
Yeah, well, if we just doze off, then we're going to count on you guys to keep us going here. We have a great group here for this conversation. Rebecca Piazza is the acting executive director of 18F at General Services. She leads 150 designers, developers, product managers, and strategists who work with federal agencies to improve the user experience of government. Previously, she was the acting director of product and deputy executive director at 18F. She also led the 18F team that helped U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services design My USCIS, where people can learn about immigration and comply to be citizens online. And before that, she spent time in industry as a project manager for Booz Allen, and she was a software developer that worked with state and local agencies. So she has a lot of experience at a lot of levels of government. And on my left is Dave Winogren, managing director in Deloitte Consulting's federal practice. Dave has a long and distinguished career in government, serving a number of high-level jobs. I'm not going to read all of them. We'll be here all day. But Assistant Deputy Chief Management Officer, Deputy CIO, Vice Chair of the U.S. government's Federal CIO Council. He also served in industry both as at a systems integrator and an executive VP of the Professional Services Council. He's won a boatload of awards. I'm not going to mention them, except he was the 2006 Government Eagle Award winner for the
best award.
Yes, that was ours. That's why I'm mentioning that one. But so we have a lot of experience here, and I'm delighted to have a conversation about how do we accelerate IT modernization. We've been talking about it today. There's certainly a major focus both in this administration and the previous one on modernizing the aging government IT infrastructure. But the best intentions often get buried down in government by a host of competing forces. So in our discussion today, we want to talk about what agencies can do to get some results quickly. So let's jump right in. And this will be a question to both of you. What would be the first thing you would suggest to agencies to get some results quickly? Rebecca, why don't you? Great.
When looking at modernization, I would recommend that people look beyond technology. So stepping back, looking at the problem that you're really trying to solve. It's very easy to get focused on the technology, to be thinking really of which tools you're going to select, what platforms you're going to move to. But this is an opportunity to fundamentally look at what problem are we trying to solve, and what value can we deliver to our users, whether those are internal users for our organization or to the public. And I know that we're talking about acceleration, but taking some of that time to really explore your problem, to make sure that you're delivering value, can ultimately accelerate things, bring you to a better outcome, and allow you to direct your resources more efficiently. I mean, if you just take what you have today and you pick it up and you maybe move it to the cloud or move it to a new programming language, but those business processes aren't supporting your users, they aren't supporting your agency's mission, ultimately that's not going to provide the value that I think we all want from modernization. So taking some time to really explore ultimately what are we trying to do can bring better results in the end.
Dave?
There's a phenomenal pace of change. The pace of technology change is just so dramatic, and it fundamentally has changed the way you live, work, and play. And yet, in large, complex organizations, it's hard to keep pace with that change. And as we look at federal agencies, who predominantly spend their money on sustainment of the old rather than the new, it can be hard to make that shift. You said one thing, but I'm going to morph it into three. As you heard from the panel earlier, having a plan is hugely important because IT modernization is a really big topic, right? And so, the next play for you depends upon where you are in that sort of continuum of IT change, and whether it's the next step in the cloud or refactoring old code or introducing process robotics or a number of other things that we'll get into in more detail as we go through this conversation. But if you don't know where you are, then like any road will do. And you have to recognize that there is a speed factor here. It's not just that we need to do more IT modernization, but if you look at the relentless pace of technology change, how do you stay abreast of that? And that argues for radically different contracting approaches, which was one of the questions from the last panel, right? That this the world moved to capabilities as a service. This idea about managed services and performance-based contracts where we're looking for outcomes and we bring the best minds of industry and government together. Because the fact of the matter is the vast majority of the $90 billion gets spent with the private sector helping government deliver stuff. And so are we really thinking through contracting approaches that allow industry to bring in new ideas and new practices? Or are we as the government still in the business of owning equipment, owning gear, building our own systems, and never being able to stay at pace of the technology change that faces us? This move to consumption-based buying a capability as a service, buying an outcome. Moving to the cloud, there are ways to do things that allow you to have industry help bear that burden of capital expenditure, depreciation, tech refresh and stuff, and so you can keep that engine going faster and allow yourself as the agency to focus more on the important process change work and things that need to be taken care of.
That's a good suggestion. Agencies certainly have been discussing DevOps and Agile. Is there a reluctance to go all in, or do you think it's a lack of resources?
I think there are a couple things at play, especially when it comes to Agile. First, I think that it can't be something that's only with the project team, only with the teams that are trying to implement systems or trying to design new systems. In order for Agile to really take hold, you need it throughout the entire organization. Leadership needs to be asking for metrics that can be achieved using Agile methodologies. If they're still asking for metrics or for deliverables that are more conducive to waterfall, it's going to be really hard sometimes in an organization for the project teams to fully adopt Agile. Similarly, you mentioned contracting shops, making sure that if vendors are part of the picture, that their contracts are written in a way that they can bring those Agile methodologies and other methodologies that are modern to play, and that the deliverables that are requested of them line up with those and support working in those new ways of working. I would also say that Agile's not enough. Agile's a tool, and it's one that gets a lot of discussion at forums like this, but increasingly we're seeing that that's not enough. You really need to bring in some additional tools, like we heard on the previous panel, around human-centered design, really keeping that user in mind as you're building your systems, and really also bringing strong product management to bear. I mean, we talk a lot about project management, our cost, schedule, and performance, and those are all very important. But also, we need to be creating that vision for the systems that we're creating and bringing someone into the team that can keep us focused on that vision, balance out our technology needs with our business goals, with our user needs, and with all of those other factors to make sure that we're developing a solution that is, of course, cost effective and meets our other project goals as well, but is really fulfilling that vision of where we want to go in the future as well.
It's a hugely important topic.
Yes.
Right?
Jump in.
And you think about it, there's so much power in customer engagement throughout the process and breaking things down into modular increments so that you're not trying to invent the whole world at one time and engaging folks through the life cycle. IT systems fail predominantly because of lack of customer involvement. It takes too long to get through the process, right? And we try to do the one big bang thing. And so there's huge power in these approaches. And it's important to sort of think our way through it. I think it does have a lot to do with thinking about agile buying, right? Because, as I mentioned before, a lot of the IT work that gets done by others, right? And so how can we be agile buyers and be savvy about what it means to be buying things in a digital world, and how do we get the entire teams that go into the acquisition process to be engaged? The Office of Federal Procurement Policy has done a lot of good work in this regard to try to set up 360 reviews of acquisitions, and Joni Newhart wants to train contracting officers in being more agile, right? But it's also important to sort of recognize that Agile doesn't necessarily mean agile software development, right? And so, right, sometimes it's about us doing it ourselves, but sometimes it's about having somebody else doing it. And it's got to be about how do you bring those elements about customer engagement throughout the process with the team that's actually doing the work with you.
So you're saying that as a service, in that whole spectrum of things you can do as a service could actually be an agile approach.
Absolutely, right? Because the power of it is, you shouldn't always be doing custom code development, right? I mean, there's times when a commercial solution is by far the better path for you. I mean, there's thousands of people at companies like Oracle and Salesforce and others that spend a lot of time helping to make those products world class for you. And so, and sometimes I feel like what we do is we say agile, and then we're like, well, that's about custom code development. And sometimes custom code development is what you need, and by God, use an agile approach when you do it. But also think through how do you remain agile in terms of how you bring capabilities to the market and engage with industry to get the work done.
So we all know the horror stories of the very old legacy systems. I think IRS has one that's 40, 50 years old, and there's some others that are remarkable in their age. How should agencies approach modernizing something? I mean, aside from the fact that there are not that many COBOL programmers around anymore, just
they're hanging in there, but they're not growing new ones as much,
How do you have such an investment in something that works, and moving it off of what you have is such a big lift? How do you tackle it?
First, I would look at modernization not as a one-time event. So when you're talking about the 40 or 50-year-old system that hasn't been updated, that's not a pattern we want to repeat. So looking at, as we're tackling this modernization, how can we set that up so that these big bang modernizations aren't needed in the future? So that we have our processes in place so that we can continue to evolve our systems and keep updating them and modernizing them on a continuous basis so that we aren't faced with these daunting tasks in the future. Tactically, looking at these large systems, how can we start with a small component that will allow us to get that first win? In addition to the technology win of then migrating this maybe to a new platform or modernizing that system, how can we create that new way of working or those new processes among that team? Because modernization is going to require a culture shift as well as a technology shift. And how can we start to plant the seeds of that culture shift and create some of those evangelists within an organization that can carry those to other parts of the modernization effort?
Well, I think the culture shift might be a magic term here. A lot of the way things have stayed is because of culture, not just server huggers, but people who don't want to give up control. Dave, you want to talk a little bit about?
Personal control is a challenge that we all face in our lives. We always feel better when we own things, and we have control of our destinies. It's a human nature thing. And as you said, it spans not just people who can't relinquish the server that they've loved and cherished, or the system that they fought through the whole process as their baby, and now somebody's telling them the system may need to go away, all the way up to appropriators in Congress who feel better when the financial control that they hold isn't like diffused by shared services sending money to some other agency. And so this is a problem throughout the system. And I mentioned earlier about how important it is to have a plan. Because IT modernization really is a continuum of events. And as Rebecca pointed out, if we get to a place where we have an engine of change that's moving more rapidly, we can not get to the place where 85% or 90% of our budget is on the old, right? And so, but we have to get ourselves to that point. And that's why it's really important for you to have a good sense for where you are and what your next play is. Because unfortunately, the things that we measure are the things that we focus our time and attention on. And so immediately, once we start to count things, right? We had a plethora of data centers in the government, right? And so we started to count those. But then everybody focuses their attention on it. Right? And that is a step, but it's not the only step. And so there's a huge play here to say, where am I in my agency on this journey? Is more rapid migration to the cloud the next step for me? But, oh, by the way, cloud is so much more than just moving a data center, right? And so how am I maximizing the value of that cloud? Do I have that old legacy system that's, I love it to death, but it's COBOL and I'm having trouble maintaining it? Well, automated code refactoring is a way to take COBOL or natural and bring it up into Java and bring yourself into a world where you could become more digital. Am I thinking about the introduction of process robotics? Imagine what could happen to the security clearance process, background investigation process with the adoption of bots and analytics that could replace people going to visit my neighbors every 7 years or 5 years with constant checking of social media. Exactly, all social media and credit checks, right? I mean, am I actually thinking about what I'm retiring, because so often we work on the new system, but we don't actually like ever turn off the things that are spending the money to keep us, right? As a former government guy, I'm very sensitive to the fact that you live in really challenging financial times. Too many periods of continuing resolutions, too much financial uncertainty, it's hard to do capital investments. But, oh, by the way, use some business judo here, because this consumption-based buying allows you to repurpose your operations and maintenance, your sustainment dollars. But it doesn't free up resources for you unless you turn some things off. So can you look for some things that need to be replaced, some things need to be renewed, and some things need to be retired. And we got to think about all three of those aspects to move forward. And you're right, cultural change gets in the way of that. But there are ways to work through that. Service level agreements and other ways to sort of build trust between you and your customers can help overcome the fear of giving up personal control.
Well, and you mentioned the data centers and the focus on data centers. And I remember and you get what you measure. So we had this plan that we were going to consolidate data centers. And there's still organizations within the government that have made data center consolidation an enormous focus. But then what's a data center? All of a sudden, we shut down some data centers, and then it turned out there were lots more data centers because there wasn't a clear understanding of what a data center was. And then all of a sudden, there were all these servers and closets, and that might be a data center. Yeah. So there's an evolving definitional exercise going on in which you claim success, but you haven't necessarily solved the problem.
Right, and you start counting the eaches, and then maybe you're focusing your time and attention on the things that are not going to make a big difference. So while I said have a plan, that's no excuse to not be moving with speed. I mean, this really is a burning platform moment, that there are ways to do IT modernization that allow you to make progress rapidly. Mm-hmm. And we have to do that because, there's not a successful company in the world that can survive spending 70, 80% or more of their budget sustaining the old and not move into the future about the new. And so we have to figure out ways to sort of jumpstart that because, every minute that we live on legacy software not updated, hardware no longer supported, it's a ticking cybersecurity time bomb. And it's not just the fact that you can't be digital. It's not just the fact that it costs too much, but it's introducing huge cybersecurity risks and vulnerabilities.
And I would add to that that's where taking the time to clarify your organizational goals, your mission goals, can really help with those decisions. Because old technology isn't necessarily bad technology in some instances.
Yes.
It helps you make your choices, figure out where you can invest both financially and to gain those technology gains, but also then to make those gains towards your mission and make sure that you're focusing on systems that will ultimately help you achieve the best results for the public and for your mission.
Yeah. Every legacy thing isn't bad, but have a plan where you're proactively thinking about what to retire, what to renew, what to replace. Yeah.
Well, so everybody agrees you should have a plan, but the process of getting the plan, are there obviously you can get, are there some models out there, some good, has OMB, anybody helped in what kind of plan you should have to make this, the path quicker, faster?
Looking on the individual system level, we like to look at the problem that we're trying to solve and really making sure we understand that problem. Frequently when we are first partnering with an agency around a problem, we do some digging and we realize that there's another goal maybe that we want to achieve or another definition of success once we are in there and on the ground. And also making sure we really understand the user base, who's going to be using the system, what their expectations of technology are and the expectations of the services that they're going to be interacting with the agency to achieve. And then using that to inform some hypotheses. So we're really usually at 18F looking more at the individual system level, a digital service, rather than moving entire data centers, as you mentioned. So making hypothesis on a type of system that might address the user's issue or that might advance the needs of the agency and looking at ways to quickly get feedback on that. Sometimes that's as simple as a paper prototype, getting out in front of some users of the system with some potential mock-ups and getting that rapid feedback so that way that we can limit investment in ideas that maybe don't turn out to be the best approach. So We like to start out with a looser plan and then work to evolve that through experimentation, through data, into that firmer roadmap and firmer plan that then we can act on, rather than setting out and thinking we have all the answers on day one.
And we shouldn't confuse have a plan with take a long time to build a plan. Mm-hmm. It's really more about an understanding of what you have and where you are. And you can spend too much time trying to count the eaches. And really, for this to work, it's just important to do something. Start small, take a step. There is a set of concerns. You see it in the debates that went around with the Modernizing Government Technology Bill as it's winding its way finally to fruition, and it's an important piece of legislation to pass. But the dialogue is all about, oh my gosh, it's going to cost a fortune in that big fund, and we'll never get the money back and stuff. And while it does take investment dollars to get a return on investment, the worst thing that you can do is try something really super big and expensive. I mean, do something where you can demonstrate a result and allay concerns that this isn't just like a big money sink. I mean, there are ways to repurpose the money that you have for better outcomes. And it's not necessarily just building another system, because it may be about process change work, and it may be about leveraging technology or having a partner that gives you something that you pay for as you go rather than having to big upfront expenditure. But don't take a long time to get started.
Great. And that's a great point, because sometimes when we get in there, we start understanding the problem, we realize the best answer is a cost solution or something that a vendor can provide rather than building something custom or something that exists in the open source community. So connecting people with the right solution and being open to whatever that solution is.
Are shared services the way to use what's already been built, or are agencies, as we talked about earlier, sort of reluctant to give up budget and control?
Yes and yes, and that's okay, right? I mean, you have more work to do at federal agencies than you have people to do it. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. And more demands and more oversight comes every day. And so there is this important conversation about what's core to you, and what's the work that requires government people to get the performance of the mission of the agency done, and what can be done by somebody else. And so if you start the conversation about shared services about like what's core to my mission and what are the supporting things for me, and then are there people who are really good at providing those supporting things? The answer is yes. There are, and so can I keep the work that's my core mission work that I'll do with my people, and I'll let somebody else who's more adept at doing this? I mean, frankly, there are some organizations that just should not be in the business of doing IT operations. I mean, we see these stories over and over again every week. And yet there are other people who are like adept at that and do this for like Fortune 100 companies around the world. And so think first about your core, and then think about, can I get experts to do this other work for me, these supporting things around IT and HR and financial services and things. There are actual, exemplars that can do this work for you. And don't just think it's got to just be another federal agency. It might be better to just get somebody who does this for everyone already to come and help you do it yourself.
I completely agree. I think focusing on the areas of expertise and strength in your agency is where you can best focus your time and your effort, and identifying what is core to that mission, identifying where you should be focusing your time, and then looking at ways to augment that expertise in other ways.
Okay. Certainly, we've heard today and previously that one of the top ways to protect data and ditch old infrastructure is to move to the cloud. Lots of agencies did that with email. Is cloud the answer? And what are the issues in just moving everything to the cloud?
So cloud's a really important part of your IT modernization framework, right? I mean, you can be really successful having moved to the cloud and still have a lot of other IT modernization work to do. So it's important to sort of think through that. But it needs to be a part of your practice. I mean, it's just such a compelling value proposition. And if I had been up here on stage when I was the DoD guy or the Navy CIO years ago, I might have said to you, we're happy to be in the cloud as long as none of you are there with us, and because of course, we're really special, and everybody's really special. But even at a place like the Department of Defense, the vast majority of stuff that gets done isn't classified. right? And so we've made a lot of progress because we've gone from, oh my gosh, to the CIA using a commercial cloud provider. So there's no reason not to be moving more rapidly to the cloud because it helps to save money. It helps to get agencies out of the business of having to do capital expenditure and depreciation. It helps with security, believe it or not, and it helps with being able to be more digital and to build on it. And yet, here we are 7 years later since the OMB Cloud First memo, and the last survey that the Professional Services Council did said only 5% of federal tech leaders feel like their agencies have made enough progress. So there are impediments to this, and we need to think through them. And the first one is the personal control one. I mean, it's hard to work our way through somebody else is going to do what I used to do myself. And to that end, there's a lot of best buying practices that can help you if you're at that point in the journey, right? And the right service level agreements allow you to measure your progress and make sure you're getting the results that you need. Not too many of them and not the wrong kind help. There's this concern about financial issues, right, and this sort of lack of control, and there are ways to address that. And then the security concerns. The American Technology Council put out their draft report to the president recently, and it had a lot of really good stuff in it about how to accelerate your migration to the cloud and the recognition that security in the cloud looks different than security for internal networks done in-house, right? And what does it mean for things like trusted internet connections and other things like that if you're using a commercial cloud provider? So we have to be willing to think differently about what security means in the cloud because, oh my gosh, this is being done like around the world for sensitive data, Financial institutions, there's lots of places that have just the same set of concerns that we do about making sure that, I've preserved my data rights and I've got the right kind of security. And so getting over those issues about things like, you think about FedRAMP. The whole purpose of FedRAMP was to bring secure commercial solutions to the marketplace and cloud more rapidly. But, and setting aside that it used to take a long time for those things to happen, I mean, all that work is for naught if we as an agency don't believe in reciprocity and relying upon the provisional authorizations and ATOs that others have done and insist on doing all those things ourselves. We create these engines that slow down the ability to do the rapid adoption.
You want to weigh in on cloud?
I think to add to that, I think another issue is realizing the complexity of moving some of these legacy systems that we have and all of the integrations with additional systems. The fact that while it may seem like a simple move to the cloud, it often requires a lot of re-architecting of systems and reimagining of those systems, and that can increase the effort involved and lead to a significant amount of complexity that agencies maybe need additional vendor help or support working through in order to make that journey. That's
an important point, and that gets back to this, it's a yes and. Mm-hmm. What am I doing to get myself out of the business of running a bunch of infrastructure, and how can I take advantage of software as a service? And how do I reimagine, I like that, reimagine these systems that I have that are crucial to the performance of the mission, and how does that fit? Because that is an and. Yeah.
And ordinarily, we would go to questions right now. However, it is time for the break, and I'm going to suggest that we go to the break, but our speakers are going to be around. If you have questions, you can ask them directly. We'll bring them coffee if need be, if you have great questions. But let's thank them for a great conversation.
Thank you.